Rama, Hare 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 Rama, Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare 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 Krishna, Krishna, Hare 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 Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Right, devotees. So here we go. We are moving into the 7th chapter of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. So we're moving. We've done, today's the 24th day, and we've done 6 chapters. Of course, we started off, we did the introduction and the preface, but yeah, say 24 days, we've done 6 chapters, that's a chapter every 4 days, that's not bad. It's a good pace. Right, so 7th chapter's titled, The Son of Drona Punished. Son of Drona means Ashvatthama. So first of all though, let us recite our prayers. Nama Om Vishnupade Krishna Presta Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschachadeshatarne Shri Krishna Chaitanya Pramanityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchikalpatarubhyas cha kripas sindubhya evacha Patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Yes, right. So, in this chapter, there are 5 sections, we say. 5 sections, altogether 58 verses. So, it's the longest chapter in terms of number of verses that we've come across so far. 5 sections, let us just run through them. First section is from verse 1 to verse 8. And what I've called it is, what did Vyas do after Narada left? What did Vyas do after Narada left? Verse 1 to verse 8. Then section B is just very short, verse 9 to verse 11. Why Shukadev studied Srimad Bhagavatam. Yeah. Why did Shukadev study Srimad Bhagavatam? Or why Shukadev studied Srimad Bhagavatam, actually, that's what I've called it. Verse 9 to verse 11. And section C, happenings after the Battle of Kurukshetra. Happenings after the Battle of Kurukshetra, verse 12 to verse 21. Then, section D, Arjuna sees Ashvatthama's Brahmastra coming. This is quite towards the end it's really quite a dramatic chapter. So yes, Arjuna sees Ashvatthama's Brahmastra coming. And it's verse 22 to verse 32. And section E, Ashvatthama arrested and judged. It's verse 33 to verse 58. Ashvatthama arrested and judged. Verse 33 to verse 58. Right, so, first section then, what did Vyas do after Narada left? Verse 1 to verse 8. Let's just read the verses and get an idea of the flow of the discussion and the pastimes and whatever's happening. So verse 1, Rishi Shonaka asked, O Sutta, the great and transcendentally powerful Vyasadeva heard everything from Sri Narada Muni. So after Narada's departure, what did Vyasadeva do? Verse 2, Sri Sutta said, on the western bank of the river Saraswati, which is intimately related with the Vedas, there is a cottage for meditation at Shamyapras, which enlivens the transcendental activities of the sages. Right. And verse 3, in that place, Srila Vyasadeva, in his own ashram, which was surrounded by berry trees, sat down to meditate after touching water for purification. So just, even though we're just reading the verses, and obviously we're going to go through in detail shortly, but let me just mention what is actually a very important point here, in these verses here, right here, is that Narada has instructed Vyasadeva. And we saw, of course, we saw some of the instructions about, why did you emphasize karma kandya, and you've got to focus more on the Lord and explain about the Lord, all these important points. But actually, he gave, as far as producing Srimad Bhagavatam is concerned, Narada Muni gave Vyasadeva specific instructions what to do. A sadhana, so he could realize Srimad Bhagavatam. So here he is then, Vyasadeva, and he's sitting down to meditate, and to meditate on Srimad Bhagavatam. And from the meditation will come Srimad Bhagavatam, at least the version of Vyasadeva, which he then later will say, a little later, he imparts to Shukadeva, who then imparts that with embellishments to Maharaj Parikshit. Right, so verse 4, and this is now describing you could say the vision, like a visionary has a vision, not like we have vision where we can see each other. The vision or the realization of Vyas in verses 4 and 5. First of all, verse 4. Thus he fixed his mind, perfectly engaging it by linking it in devotional service, bhakti yoga, without any tinge of materialism. And thus he saw the absolute personality of Godhead, along with his external energy, which was under full control. So this is sort of the basis of Srimad Bhagavatam as realized by Vyasa. Then verse 5, there's more. This is also the realization of Vyasa. Due to this external energy, verse 5, the living entity, although transcendental to the three modes of material nature, thinks of himself as a material product and thus undergoes the reactions of material miseries. So that's verse 5, which has got a fairly substantial purport. So now this is an explanation of the realization of Vyasa. Yeah, it's part of the realization, I guess you'd say. The material miseries of the living entity, which are superfluous to him, can be directly mitigated by the linking process of devotional service. But the mass of people do not know this, and therefore the learned Vyasadeva compiled this Vedic literature, which is in relation to the supreme truth. And verse 7. So in other words, that's the basis of his realization of Srimad Bhagavatam, which he's going to expand. Verse 7, simply by giving oral reception to this Vedic literature, the feeling for loving devotional service to Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, sprouts up at once to extinguish the fire of lamentation, illusion, and fearfulness. So that's verse 7. It's also got a, I would say, fairly substantial purport. Verse 8. The great sage Vyasadeva, after compiling the Srimad Bhagavatam and revising it, taught it to his own son, Sri Shukadev Goswami, who was already engaged in self-realization. Okay. So you see, here we are. Verse 8 is talking about Vyasadeva. He has compiled already the Srimad Bhagavatam. I mean, there's a bit more to it than that. We hope it will not be confusing. But there is a bit more to it than that, which comes up in verse 8, including the purport. You may have to fasten your seatbelts a little because it's, it's kind of, pretty amazing. You might not expect what happens as far as compilation of Srimad Bhagavatam is concerned. So, okay, here we go. Back to verse 1. What did Vyasa do after Narada left? Well, as we read, as he was instructed by Narada, he went into meditation and realized Srimad Bhagavatam and then compiled it, had it written. By Ganesh. And this is all going on at Badrik Ashram, Badrinath. Anyone been to Badrinath here? Bharat? No, nobody. Anyway, I hope to go in a couple of years or something. Yeah. Well, I've still got a little energy because it's quite something. And Vyasa's cave is there. And just down from it is Ganesha's cave. And Vyasa recited and Ganesh wrote. Okay, so anyway, here we go. Verse 1. Rishi Shonaka asked, O Sutta, the great and transcendentally powerful Vyasadeva heard everything from Sri Narada Muni. So after Narada's departure, what did Vyasadeva do? I mean, he heard everything. We just got the most essential essence. I mean, yeah, we just got a very, very abbreviated version of what Narada instructed to Vyasa, which that's fine, that's enough. So what did he do? So here we have little purport. I think I'll just read the purport, just listen. In this chapter, the clue for describing Srimad Bhagavatam is picked up as Maharaj Parikshit is miraculously saved in the womb of his mother. This was called by Droni, which is another name of Ashvatthama, Acharya Drona's son, who killed the 5 sons of Draupadi while they were asleep, for which he was punished by Arjuna. Before commencing the great epic Srimad Bhagavatam, Sri Vyasadeva realized the whole truth by trance, in devotion. So, in a certain sense, it can be said, we haven't started the Bhagavatam yet. We're just it's all introductory so far. Something like that. Okay, so that was the purport. I read the purport. The whole purport there. Verse 2. Sri Sutta said, on the western bank of the river Saraswati, which is intimately related with the Vedas, there is a cottage for meditation at Shamyaprasa, or Shamyaprasa, which enlivens the transcendental activities of the sages. So yes, having been there twice, I mentioned the other day, hopefully you remember, the Saraswati comes out from under the rocks, a little up. Have you been there? Badrinath? No. Why? Okay, anyway, it's all right. So, yeah, it comes up. You have darshan, you're standing on a bridge, Bhima's bridge. It's not it's a big, heavy bridge, but it's not it's about as wide as this room, I'd say, or something. As long as the width of this room. And it's made of rock by Bhima. I think he pulled some of the cliff down and just put it there to be the bridge. And you look up from there and you see the Saraswati coming from under the rocks. And then it flows down under the bridge and down and joins the Alakananda. And that's the Saraswati. But it sort of, I wouldn't say it surfaces again, but at Varanasi, right? Varanasi, where the Kumbh Mela is. Prayag. there you've got the Yamuna and the Ganges, and they meet together. And you can't, I've never been there, so I haven't seen, but as I understand, in some subtle form, the Saraswati joins. This is the understanding. So it's called Triveni, three, not just Dviveni. Yeah. Right, yeah, and Vyasa's ashram is up to the left. Well, anyway, if it's coming down, the river's coming down this way, you're standing on the bridge looking up, and you've come from that side. Vyasa's ashram is around and just up 100 or 150 meters or something. Okay, so here we go, devotees. We have a purport here that, well, yes, of course, for spiritual advancement of knowledge or just plain spiritual advancement, a suitable place and atmosphere are required. And this place, or a place on the western bank of the Saraswati, is especially suitable. And I must say, it really is. It's really quite a place, that. It is a real classic place and suitable for meditation, Krishna conscious activity. In the winter it gets cold though, it's snowbound in the winter. As I understand, the whole place is completely under snow. It's the Himalayas, and it's quite well up in the Himalayas. So anyway, so this ashram of Vyasadeva is there, and it was very good. And it wasn't called his house, it's called his ashram, because ashram means a place for spiritual development, spiritual culture. It's an ashram, so it was his ashram. You know, some devotees, householders, devotees, they refer to their houses as ashrams, but they have televisions, and I don't know what they watch, if it's only Krishna conscious DVDs or whatever. But an ashram, Vyasadeva did not have a TV. Yeah, no television. Of course, Vyasadeva had spiritual television. He could see what was going on in other places. But that's something else. Okay, so let's carry on. So Prabhupada gets into the whole subject of spiritual ways of life, that it doesn't matter, an ashram, ashrams, talking about ashrams, it doesn't matter if it's a householder's ashram or a sannyas ashram or a brahmachari ashram or a mixture of all the ashrams. I mean, yeah, but it's an ashram, a place for spiritual culture. It's not just a house. So the whole, Prabhupada explains, the whole Varnashram system is arranged so that these are all ashrams, places for spiritual development, for brahmacharis to develop, for householders to develop spiritually, vanaprasthas, sannyasis to develop spiritually, because the mission is the same. The mission is the same in each of the 4 ashrams: spiritual development and ultimately realization of the Lord. So ultimately they are Prabhupada says, therefore, none of them are less important as far as spiritual culture is concerned. And sometimes you get grihastas like Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He's a householder with 10 children. You know, that is a big family. But he was so Krishna conscious. He was just so totally Krishna conscious. So therefore, in that context, Prabhupada says, none of those ashrams are less important. Although there's a difference as in a matter of formality on the strength of renunciation. The sannyasis are held in high estimation on the strength of practical renunciation. Okay. Right, so now verse 3. In that place, Srila Vyasadeva in his own ashram, which was surrounded by berry trees, sat down to meditate after touching water for purification. So he's going to produce Srimad Bhagavatam. That's what he's going to do. He's going to meditate and realize Srimad Bhagavatam. Then he's going to recite it to Ganesh, who's going to write it. Right. So purport, Prabhupada says, under instructions of his spiritual master, Srila Narada Muni, Vyasadeva concentrated his mind in that transcendental place of meditation. Under instructions, in other words, the point is that Narada had told him to do a specific type of meditation for realizing Srimad Bhagavatam. You know, Narada didn't just tell him, you must explain about Krishna more clearly, who he is, what he is. He didn't just say that. He gave him a system, a program of activity by which he could just enter into those things and it would all be revealed. Right, so for those, okay, anyway, no, that's all right. So, right, verse 4. Now this is a really important verse. It's a very famous verse from Srimad Bhagavatam. You know, sometimes some, not really devotees, but just Vedic sort of people who study Vedic literatures and so on, some of them, particularly the impersonalists, say that actually Srimad Bhagavatam is, even though it talks about Krishna and the different avatars a lot, but really what it's promoting is the impersonal absolute. In order to, well, Srila Jiva Goswami actually, in Tattva Sandarbha, in order to establish, as part of the program for establishing that Srimad Bhagavatam is about Krishna, and any mention of like Brahman, something impersonal, or Paramatma even, not really fully manifest Supreme Lord, just partially manifest. It's all being done in the context of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. First Canto, Chapter 3, verse 28, if you remember. Yeah, Ete Changsa Kala Pumsa, Krishna's tu Bhagavan Swayam. Yes, so Jiva Goswami, to establish this point, he says, and it's really an important point, I mean, it's just brilliant. We have to understand the realization of Vyas, what his understanding was of the absolute truth, because he's the author. We have to understand what the author says. Otherwise, if someone's going to come along and tell the author what he means, this is not how it works. The author is the one to say what his book means. So there's Vyas, but then secondly, we have to understand also what is the realization of Shukadev Goswami, his understanding of the absolute truth. And we find it's the same as Vyasa's. So what is the realization of Vyas? This is described particularly right here in verses 4 and 5, like the essence of the realization of Vyas, of the realization of the absolute truth, following the process, the program of activity given to him by Narada Muni. So verse 4, thus he fixed his mind, perfectly engaging it by linking it in devotional service, bhakti yoga, without any tinge of materialism. And thus he saw the absolute personality of Godhead along with his external energy, which was under full control. So this is the first part of his realization. And what he saw, we don't read the Sanskrit of all these verses. We could do actually, but generally we don't understand Sanskrit enough. Are the Sanskrit classes still happening? I see. Okay. So anyway, in the Sanskrit, what the Sanskrit says, let me just read the verse to you. Bhakti yogena manasi. He fixed his mind in bhakti yoga. Samyak pranihate malay apashyat purusham purnam. Apashyat means he saw. And what did he see? Purusham purnam, the complete personality. Means the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the complete person. He saw him. Mayam chatadapashrayam. And he saw also that Maya was there, but Maya was under the Lord's full control. Okay, so there you go, devotees. This is really something you got to get. Just for your own good, really, but also it's such an important part of Srimad Bhagavatam, particularly if you want to look at it on a little deeper level. So there's a purport here. And Srila Prabhupada begins by saying, perfect vision of the absolute truth is possible only by the linking process of devotional service. And of course that's explained in Bhagavad Gita elaborately. You can only realize the absolute truth personality of Godhead by devotional service, and then on the basis of that enter the kingdom of God. And any realization, impersonal realization, or even the super soul is imperfect or incomplete at least. And being incomplete, you can say it's imperfect. And even realization of Paramatma will not allow you to enter the kingdom of God. You have to realize the absolute personality of Godhead, Purusham Purnam, the complete person, the ultimate absolute person. So, Srila Prabhupada makes the point that Narada had advised Vyasa to become absorbed in meditation on the personality of Godhead and his activities, and therefore Vyasadeva didn't take notice of Brahman. Perhaps when he went into his meditation, maybe he saw Brahman. Maybe he didn't also, but he didn't take it seriously. He just became absorbed in seeing the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who was completely controlling the material nature. Right. So anyway, basically we see here the absolute truth in a number of places is described as personality of Godhead. I'm looking at here, Narada advised Vyasadeva become absorbed in meditation on the personality of Godhead and his activities. Then, just a couple of sentences on, the absolute vision is the personality of Godhead. Then another couple of sentences on that Vasudeva, the personality of Godhead, is covered by the impersonal Brahman. And then a little further on, few sentences, the Absolute is mentioned here as the Purusha, or person. The absolute personality of Godhead is mentioned in so many Vedic literatures. In any way, to cut a long story short, Srila Prabhupada, it is being emphasized that the Absolute is what? George? Say a person. Say a person. Very good. Yeah, he's a person. But the problem is, as Ishopanishad says, Hiranmayena Patrena, there's the veil of the Brahmajyoti. And if you've read Ishopanishad, you would know last few verses, the speaker is saying to the Supreme Lord that I can't see you because your effulgence is blinding me. Please remove your effulgence. Which then, so anyway, that happens. So, right, Supreme Person, it's all the Supreme Person. And realized, you can realize all of this, and Vyasa realized by the mercy of the Lord. And we can also do that by mercy. And of course, Maya, the external energy, is, as Vyasa has realized, fully under control, the control of the Lord. The Purusham Purnam, the complete person, Supreme Person. Yes. But devotional service is, by which, because it's mentioned in the verse, Bhakti Yogena Manasi, by devotional service. A little Sanskrit lesson, the ending Aina, Bhakti Yogena in the Sanskrit. Aina means by. It's the instrumental case. You can do this. This was done by Krishna, Krishnena, or in this case here, Bhakti Yogena, by Bhakti Yoga. Manasi, he fixed his mind by Bhakti Yoga, devotional service. And through that he had this realization. Right, so that devotional service then is above the external potency, because the Lord is above the external potency. The external potency is completely under the control of the Lord, and Vyasadeva has realized the Lord by Bhakti Yoga. So, in other words, devotional service is higher, is not material. It's spiritual, and it gives spiritual realization. This is what's happened here. The spiritual realization of Vyasadeva, his realization of the Lord. And for those of you who are actually doing Bhakti Vaibhava, there is an analogy. The analogy, it's the next verse. Is it the next verse? No, wait a sec. Yeah. So in the purport, there it says, the internal energy is there along with the absolute person, as the moonlight is there with the moon. Yeah, there it is. It's sort of halfway down the purport. It's an analogy. Make note of it if you're doing the actual Bhakti Vaibhava. That the internal energy is there along with the absolute person, as the moonlight is there with the moon. This is an analogy. Okay. On to the next part of Vyasadeva's realization, verse 5. So, but it's part of the same thing. It's part of the same realization. Due to this external energy, the living entity, although transcendental to the three modes of material nature, thinks of himself as a material product and thus undergoes the reactions of material miseries. In other words, Vyasadeva saw it. He saw that there were living, he basically saw everything, really. That's the understanding. He just saw everything. In his meditation, he saw the spiritual worlds, saw Radha and Krishna, because he saw the absolute personality of Godhead, who is never alone. He's never alone. So what it's saying here, Sutta Goswami is saying here, is just in a nutshell. It's really in a nutshell. So he also saw the living entities. Don't think he didn't. He saw the living entities. And he saw some of them that even though they're transcendental to the three modes of material nature, still, due to contact with the external energy, some of the living entities think they're material products. And because they think they're material products, they have to undergo the reactions of material miseries. So all these things Vyas saw by practicing the system of meditation which is specifically designed for realizing Srimad Bhagavatam, but which was given to him by Narada Muni. All right, so now there is definitely a purport here. I think it's 3 paragraphs. So Srila Prabhupada, ever, thorough. Srila Prabhupada is so incredibly thorough. In the purport here, he really starts exploring the position of the conditioned souls and of the liberated souls, but particularly when the liberated souls become conditioned, and the problem there when you become conditioned by Maya. So the purport begins by explaining that the root cause of suffering by the materialistic living beings is pointed out with remedial measures. Yes, with remedial measures. Remedial measures means devotional service. These measures which are to be done. And ultimately the ultimate perfection that can be reached. This is all explained in this verse. So Prabhupada, he explains what is the living being, constitution transcendental to matter, but he's now imprisoned by the external energy and therefore thinks of himself as a product of this world. And due to all that, the living entities suffer under the modes. So in other words, it's a very clear description of the position of the living entity. I mean, even mentioning briefly the position of the pure living entity, but particularly focusing on the contaminated, confused, imprisoned by the external energy living entity. So in this way, due to this unholy contact with Maya, we suffer material miseries under the modes. So yes, Prabhupada continues, we misunderstand ourselves to be material products, and that means that all our current functioning, thinking, feeling, willing, and just everything which we're involved in, it's all unnatural. It's just all a big nonsense. We, in our pure state, we think, feel, and will, but we do so in Krishna-conscious ways, not in these nescient ways. So, and Prabhupada makes a good point, interesting point, that the theory that a living being is absolute impersonal Brahman is refuted herein. So, it can't really be like that, because by nature we're transcendental persons. But we've contacted the external energy, and so now we think we're products of the material world, but actually we are individual living entities who have our individual ways of thinking when we're in the pure state. So we carry on. I mean, this is fairly substantial, isn't it? So the illusory energy takes the initiative and entangles the living entities. And actually the Lord doesn't want the living entities to be entangled, but Maya entangles them. So therefore, Maya Devi is, what does it say she is? Okay, it doesn't mention here yet. But actually Maya Devi, I think there's a verse coming up which explains that Maya Devi is embarrassed. She doesn't feel good. Because even though it's her duty to the Lord to bewilder the independently minded conditioned souls, but she knows it's bad for them. And therefore it's like a thankless task for her. It's like a thankless task. Prabhupada says, the Lord doesn't desire that a living being be illusioned by external energy. And the external energy, or at least Maya Devi, the deity of it, is aware of this fact. But still she accepts a thankless task of keeping the forgotten soul under illusion by her bewildering influence. And the Lord doesn't interfere, he lets her carry on. Because the living entities, they've just got to go through these things, being in Maya, in order to become corrected. And Prabhupada gives an example here to illustrate an affectionate father doesn't like his children to be chastised by another agent, yet he puts his disobedient children under the custody of a severe man just to bring them to order. I don't know when you were at school. When you were at school, did you ever get caned or, that sort of thing? Girls too. Really? Wow, that's bad. We got caned. We got caned. My parents, I don't think they ever hit me. But at school we got caned. And they knew. Our parents knew that this was going on. So it's like this example Prabhupada's giving, that the parents want their children to be straightened out, but they don't want to be too harsh. So they let someone else be harsh. And that's Maya. Krishna doesn't personally want to put the living entities into the suffering in Maya, so he lets Maya Devi do it. And then from time to time, the Lord comes to deliver us. And Prabhupada gives the example of a king. Sometimes the king visits the prison, and when he does that, don't think, they caught him too. But just understand, he's the king, he's coming to check it out and to try to correct the prisoners. And if he orders, let him go, then you're freed. That person's freed. Yeah, this is all, there's a whole lot of discussion here on these points. It's all revolving around these points of how things work in the material world for the conditioned souls and the process for reforming the conditioned souls. And sure, it is quite a purport, isn't it? So at the end of the purport, Prabhupada concludes the paragraph by saying, within the heart of every living being, the Lord himself as the supersoul Paramatma becomes the spiritual master. And from without he becomes the spiritual master in the shape of scriptures, saints, and the initiator, spiritual master. This is still more explicitly explained in the next shloka. We will get there, let's hope this evening. So let's go on. So, Maya is punishing the living entities. It's all Krishna's program for reforming them so that they then change their ways and become good. So, second paragraph, Maya is supervised. Yes. Maya is supervised. Yeah, okay. Living entities are controlled by Maya. But Maya, so the conditioned living entities are under Maya. And they cannot just get up and say, well, I'm going, I've had enough of you. It's a whole thing to get out. But in the purport here in the second paragraph, Prabhupada makes the point that that same Maya is situated in the inferior position before the Lord. And, Maya, it was said there, Maya was at a distance. Maya was at a distance. She's feeling embarrassed, kind of hiding her face. Why do I have to do this horrible? It may be a service, but it's a horrible service. Yeah. So Maya cannot approach the Lord. She can only work on the living entities. Yeah, boy, that's a tough position, although she's a devotee. And therefore we shouldn't think the Lord is illusioned by Maya, certainly. If the jiva Prabhupada explains, it's sort of in the middle of this paragraph, that if the living being and the Lord were in the same category, then it would have been quite possible for Vyas to see it. He would have seen that the living entities are with the Lord, they're equal with the Lord. But he saw that they're under Maya, who is under the Lord. This is very important, this realization of Vyas. So if the living being and the Lord were in the same category, then the living beings wouldn't be in distress as has been described. They have been described as being, oi, what happened? I'm sorry, my computer just sort of backfired on me. I'm sorry, I've got to just go back to the correct verse. It's verse, what is it, 5. Okay. Yaya samohito jiva. Oh yes. So, just going back to the verse itself, just connecting it up to the purport, the verse says, due to this external energy, the living entity, although transcendental to the modes, thinks he's a material product. So you see, in verse 4, he sees the Lord. Then he sees Maya. And Maya is completely under the control of the Lord. Now in this verse 5, he sees the living entities who are under the control of Maya. They think they're material products, and they're going through the miseries of material existence. So anyway, Prabhupada made the point in the second paragraph that if the Jiva and the Lord were in the same category, Vyasa would have seen it, but he didn't see that. He saw they're in totally different categories. The Lord's the absolute personality of Godhead, Purusham Purnam, the complete person. Then there's Maya Devi, who is completely under the Lord's control. Then there's the living entities in the material world, and they're completely under the control of Maya. So there's no question of the living entities and the Lord being the same. Although they are spiritual, so therefore they're one and different. One and different. Where are we? What happened? Okay. So now we come to the third paragraph, or third paragraph. And it's saying that Srimad Bhagavatam is the summum bonum remedy for suffering humanity. Summum bonum just means the total, complete remedy for suffering humanity. So Vyasa has, in this verse, diagnosed the predicament, the actual disease of the living entities. Just see, this verse is just really significant. He's diagnosed their disease, that is, their illusion by Maya. He saw the Lord, from whom the illusory energy is far removed, and he saw both the disease-conditioned souls and the cause of the disease, devotional service. So the remedial measures, like some detail on the remedy, is coming up in verse 6. Yes. So, okay. So in the third paragraph, Prabhupada makes the point that we and the Lord, we are undoubtedly qualitatively one, but the Lord controls the illusory energy, whereas we are controlled by it. So, we are spiritual, but there are other things. And Krishna's spiritual. We're as spiritual as him, you could say, qualitatively. But there are other features of our nature which are very different from his nature. Right. So, okay. Prabhupada concludes this little bit extensive purport by saying, another point is distinct herein. That eternal relation between the Lord and the living being is transcendental. Otherwise, the Lord would not have taken the trouble to reclaim the conditioned souls from the clutches of Maya. In the same way, the living entity is also required to revive his natural love and affection for the Lord. And that is the highest perfection of the living entity. Yeah. So here's another, verse 6 is another one. It's Vyasa's realization after seeing what he saw. in verses 4 and 5, the central parts of his realization. So verse 6, the material miseries of the living entity, which are superfluous to him, can be directly mitigated by the linking process of devotional service. But the mass of people don't know this, and therefore the learned Vyasadeva compiled this Vedic literature, which is in relation to the supreme truth. Well, it's Sutta Goswami speaking, commenting on the realization of Vyas. So Prabhupada, it's an interesting purport. Vyas saw the Lord, but this statement suggests, this verse suggests that the Lord, like the Lord in his most complete aspect or condition, state, includes the jivas, includes the living entities. So they're one complete unit, you can say. But then he saw all the different, he saw so many things. Prabhupada explains. He saw his different energies, internal, marginal, external. He also saw his different plenary portions and parts of the plenary portions, namely his incarnations. So Prabhupada's elaborating on what Vyasadeva saw in verses 4 and 5. It just mentions the Lord, external energy, the conditioned souls. But actually, Vyasadeva saw more. He saw these things: internal, marginal, external energies, his different plenary portions and parts of the plenary portions. So many forms of himself he saw, his different incarnations, and he also saw the unwanted miseries of the conditioned souls. But then at last, he saw that there's a remedial process, that's devotional service. He saw that. Devotional service is what can save the otherwise helpless and hopeless conditioned souls who are just locked into a pathetic situation which just goes on and just goes on. And otherwise seems to just be eternal. Just like lock him up, throw away the key, and just forget about him. That's it. It doesn't count any longer. So he saw the process in verse 6. He saw the process of devotional service, through which one can become free from the Maya and go back to the Lord. And Prabhupada makes interesting point, sort of in the middle of this purport. Is it in the middle, or I don't know, maybe just a little past the middle of this purport? It's past, yeah. Revival of the dormant affection or love of Godhead does not depend on the mechanical system of hearing and chanting, but it solely and wholly depends on the causeless mercy of the Lord. When the Lord is fully satisfied with the sincere efforts of the devotee, he may endow him with his loving transcendental service. But even when you're just in a prescribed way, just as a sadhana, you're doing hearing and chanting, there's very beneficial effect. And of course, reviving our love of God, Prabhupada's emphasizing, depends on the causeless mercy of the Lord, solely and wholly. But the Lord is satisfied with the efforts of the devotee, doing what? Hearing and chanting. Yeah. But not, as Prabhupada says, it doesn't depend on the mechanical system of hearing and chanting. It depends on really the devotional process of in a mood of dependence on the Lord, hearing and chanting. So, Prabhupada concludes the purport, such mitigation of material affection does not wait for development of transcendental knowledge. Rather, knowledge is dependent on devotional service for the ultimate realization of the supreme truth. Okay, well, that's all very deep. I hope it wasn't, I didn't get too carried away with it and just bewilder anyone. Are you feeling bewildered? Oh, Krishna. Anyway, sorry. Anyway, that's what it was about. So, okay, now verse 7. Simply by giving oral reception to this Vedic literature, the feeling for loving devotional service to Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, sprouts up at once to extinguish the fire of lamentation, illusion, and fearfulness. So let me just, one more time, just very succinctly, briefly, clarify what the previous 3 verses have been saying. 4, 5, 6. This is the realization of Vyas when he was in trance, as instructed by Narada. And first he saw the Lord, then he saw Maya Devi, and she was fully under the control of the Lord and looking kind of bashful or embarrassed. Then, that was verse 4. Then verse 5, he saw the living entities who were under Maya. Yes, that was the long purport. The living entities who were under Maya. Right. They're under Maya. Maya's under the control of the Lord, verse 4. Living entities, conditioned souls in this world, they're under Maya, who's under the Lord. And being under Maya, they don't know what's going on at all. They think they're just products of the material world. Then he saw, verse 6, he saw the remedial process. Remedial, you must understand that. The remedy. What's the remedy? He saw devotional service. He must have seen some living entities doing devotional service and going back to Godhead. He probably saw that because he saw the internal, marginal, and external potencies. He saw so many incarnations. I'm sure he saw Radharani, he saw the cows. He saw all these things. So he saw the process for the living entity to get out of being under Maya. And that process is devotional service. Although unfortunately, generally people don't know about it. Does that make sense? It should do. It really should do. So what to do? Our time's up. We are going to come back on Monday to verse 7. No problem. We'll just carry on. Yes, of course. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.